What if the biggest mistake people make about Harry and Meghan's controversies is assuming the drama is a problem? Because look at the pattern. A quote appears, a friend speaks, a source whispers, a trailer drops, a photo gets posted, a royal event happens, a headline suddenly connects it back to them, and within hours, everyone is back in the same place. The newspapers are writing, the TV panels are debating, the podcasts are reacting, the YouTube channels are uploading, the supporters are defending, the critics are furious, and the algorithm is absolutely delighted. So the question is not just, what happened this time? The better question is, who benefits every time this happens? Because once you look at the Harry and Meghan story as a media economy, not just a royal family feud, the whole thing starts to look very different. This is not only a story about two people who left the royal family. It is a story about attention. It is a story about how outrage gets packaged, sold, defended, recycled, and then served back to the same audience in a slightly different form. And here is the uncomfortable part. Almost everyone in this cycle claims to be tired of the drama. The palace wants dignity and distance. The press says it is only reporting public interest. The Sussexes say they want safety, privacy, or control of their own narrative. The commentators say they are just responding to the latest development. The audience says, I cannot believe we are still talking about this. And yet, somehow, here we are. Again. That does not happen by accident. Stories do not survive this long unless there is fuel being added from more than one direction. And with Harry and Meghan, the fuel is not just scandal. It is not just gossip. It is not even just royal curiosity. The fuel is incentive. And incentive is far more powerful than opinion. If a story gives newspapers traffic, they will keep printing it. If it gives television panels heat, they will keep booking it. If it gives streaming platforms controversy, they will keep packaging it. If it gives commentators clicks, they will keep dissecting it. If it gives public figures sympathy, relevance, or leverage, they will keep touching the wire. And if the audience keeps watching, the machine keeps spinning. That is the profit loop. Not necessarily a secret plan, not necessarily a conspiracy, not a smoky room where everyone meets and agrees what the next scandal will be. It is something simpler, colder, and much more common. A system where everyone can say, I am only reacting, while still benefiting from the reaction. And that is why this story has outlived almost every normal celebrity news cycle. Most scandals burn hot, peak, and disappear. A celebrity says something foolish, a brand deal gets criticized, a legal fight explodes, a documentary drops, a memoir lands, and then the public eventually moves on. But the Harry and Meghan story keeps renewing itself because it sits at the intersection of several audiences at once. Royal watchers, celebrity gossip fans, political commentators, culture war audiences, British press critics, American media consumers, people who defend the monarchy, people who distrust the monarchy, people who see Meghan as mistreated, people who see Meghan as manipulative, people who see Harry as wounded, people who see Harry as privileged and reckless. That is not one audience. That is an engine. And every new controversy feeds a different part of it. For one group, it is a love story ruined by racism and old institutions. For another, it is a cautionary tale about entitlement and fame. For another, it is proof that the monarchy is outdated. For another, it is proof that the monarchy looks more stable when it says nothing. For another, it is not even about monarchy. It is about media hypocrisy, free speech, class, gender, family loyalty, celebrity culture, or the way victimhood can become a brand. This is why a small detail can become a large event. A hand gesture, a photograph, a seating arrangement, a missing invitation, a phrase in an interview, a line in a book, a family member's silence, a Netflix clip, a red carpet appearance, a podcast rumor, a source close to someone who may or may not be close to anyone. In a normal story, these details might be too small to matter. In the Harry and Meghan economy, they are raw material. They become evidence. And the word evidence is doing a lot of work here, because most of the time, people are not just watching the story, they are building a case. That is one of the deepest reasons this topic has so much staying power. The audience is not passive. The audience participates. People clip old interviews. They compare body language. They remember timelines. They revisit statements from years ago. They point out contradictions. They argue over what was meant, what was implied, what was staged, what was leaked, what was denied, and what was never properly explained. That turns a royal news cycle into something closer to a courtroom drama. And courtroom dramas are addictive because the viewer is not just entertained. The viewer feels invited to judge. So when a new controversy appears, the audience does not start from zero. They bring the whole history with them. The Oprah interview, the Netflix series, the memoir, the interviews around the memoir, the family rift, the titles, the security dispute, the accusations, the denials, the public appearances, the business ventures, the podcast deals, the brand launches, the alleged leaks, the silence from the palace, the carefully timed statements, the moments that looked accidental but felt very convenient. Every new story lands on top of that archive. That means even a small headline carries the emotional weight of years. And in media terms, that is gold. Because the hardest thing in content is not getting attention once. It is getting people to return with strong feelings already loaded. Harry and Meghan do that, not because everyone loves them, not because everyone hates them, but because nearly everyone who follows the story has already chosen a lens. And once people have chosen a lens, they do not just watch for information, they watch for confirmation, contradiction, and escalation. That is why headlines around them rarely sound neutral. They do not say, "A public figure attended an event." They say the event was a snub, a comeback, a humiliation, a warning, a crisis, a desperate attempt, a calculated move, a final blow, a secret message, a fresh insult, or a major turning point. Why? Because neutral does not feed the loop. Conflict feeds the loop. And this is where the story becomes much bigger than Harry and Meghan themselves. Because whether you sympathize with them or not, they have become one of the clearest examples of how modern fame works when it collides with old institutions. The monarchy is built on continuity. Celebrity media is built on disruption. The monarchy survives by making itself seem bigger than any one individual. Celebrity survives by making the individual impossible to ignore. The monarchy speaks in symbols, ceremonies, and carefully controlled statements. Celebrity culture speaks in confession, access, emotion, reinvention, and personal truth. So when Harry and Meghan stepped away from royal life and entered the global media marketplace, the question was never only, can they tell their side? The question was, can they tell their side without becoming dependent on the very conflict that makes their side valuable? Because let us be honest, the market was not paying for ordinary lifestyle content at the beginning. The market was paying for proximity to the royal family. That is the asset. The palace gates, the private conversations, the family tension, the accusation that the public did not know the full story, the promise that behind the fairy tale was something darker, colder, more painful, more complicated. That was the hook. And once that becomes the hook, escaping it is extremely difficult. Because if your public value is built around telling people what happened inside the royal system, then every time you move away from that subject, the audience has to decide whether it is still interested. And every time you move back toward that subject, the machine rewards you. That is the trap. Talk about healing, and the press may listen politely. Talk about family conflict, and the world listens immediately. Talk about charity work, and some people will cover it. Talk about what the palace did or did not do, and everyone covers it. Talk about a new brand, a new show, a new project, a new lifestyle vision, and the response may be mixed. But connect it to royal tension, royal symbolism, royal timing, royal comparison, or royal resentment, and suddenly, it becomes part of the larger saga. This does not mean every move is planned as drama. That would be too simple. The more interesting point is that the system rewards the dramatic interpretation, whether or not the original move was intended that way. A photo can be just a photo, but in this ecosystem, it becomes a message. A silence can be just a silence, but in this ecosystem, it becomes a strategy. A public appearance can be just a public appearance, but in this ecosystem, it becomes a rival event. A business launch can be just a business launch, but in this ecosystem, it becomes a referendum on status, taste, influence, and revenge. And once the interpretation is profitable, the interpretation spreads faster than the fact. That is why, when people say, "Why does the media keep talking about them?" the answer is not complicated. Because the media is not only talking about Harry and Meghan, it is talking about everything the audience has attached to them. Trust, class, race, family, marriage, fame, duty, privacy, hypocrisy, revenge, status, the old Britain, the new celebrity economy, the difference between service and self-expression, the difference between being seen and being respected. Those are huge emotional themes. Harry and Meghan are the characters through which those themes get played out. And that is where the profit loop becomes so durable. A normal celebrity scandal asks, "Did this person do the thing?" A Harry and Meghan scandal asks, "What does this prove about the world?" That is a much bigger question. And bigger questions create bigger comment sections. This is also why the story is so useful to commentators. A political commentator can use it to talk about elite hypocrisy. A royal commentator can use it to talk about duty and protocol. A celebrity commentator can use it to talk about image management. A media critic can use it to talk about tabloids and victim narratives. A cultural commentator can use it to talk about identity, grievance, narcissism, compassion, cruelty, or the collapse of privacy. The same story can be sold in 5 different shops. That is rare. And when a story can travel across categories, it becomes almost impossible to kill. Because even if one audience gets bored, another audience picks it up. If royal watchers cool down, celebrity press can revive it. If celebrity press cools down, political channels can frame it as a culture war issue. If political channels move on, lifestyle media can cover a brand launch. If lifestyle media moves on, a legal dispute, a family anniversary, a public ceremony, or a new interview can pull the whole thing back into circulation. This is why the cycle feels endless. It is not one cycle, it is several cycles feeding each other. And the most powerful cycles are the ones where criticism and promotion become almost indistinguishable. Think about that. If someone releases a project and fans praise it, that is attention. If critics mock it, that is also attention. If newspapers call it a disaster, that is attention. If YouTubers make response videos, that is attention. If supporters defend it against the response videos, that is attention. If the backlash becomes the story, that is attention. If the subject then responds to the backlash, the loop resets. In the old media world, bad press could damage a career by limiting access. In the new media world, bad press can damage reputation while still increasing visibility. And visibility can be monetized. That is the strange bargain at the center of modern celebrity. You can be losing trust and gaining attention at the same time. Those two things are not the same. And this is one of the biggest misunderstandings in the whole Harry and Meghan conversation. People often treat attention as proof of success. They are still being talked about, so they are winning. But attention is not always power. Sometimes attention is a spotlight. Sometimes it is a warning light. Sometimes it is a market signal. Sometimes it is a cage. If people click because they admire you, that is one kind of value. If people click because they distrust you, that is another. If people click because they cannot look away from the next contradiction, that creates numbers, but it does not necessarily create loyalty. If people click because they expect a collapse, that keeps you relevant, but it also turns your reputation into a suspense show. That is a dangerous place to live, because once your relevance depends on conflict, peace becomes commercially risky. And that may be the central problem. What happens to a media brand built on escape from the royal family if the audience is most interested when the royal family is still involved? What happens to a privacy narrative when the marketplace rewards exposure? What happens to a healing narrative when public attention spikes during accusation, tension, and grievance? What happens when every attempt to move forward is judged by what came before? This is why the profit loop is not just about money. It is about identity. The public story of Harry and Meghan has been shaped around a few powerful emotional claims that they were misunderstood, mistreated, trapped, endangered, silenced, and forced to create a new life on their own terms. Those claims created sympathy from many people. They also created skepticism from many others. But either way, they created a framework. And once a public figure builds a framework, the audience uses it to interpret everything that follows. If they ask for privacy, people compare it to their media deals. If they speak about pain, people compare it to public criticism of family members. If they talk about compassion, people compare it to the damage caused by past interviews. If they build a lifestyle brand, people compare it to the moral seriousness of their earlier claims. If they appear at glamorous events, people compare it to the life they said they needed to escape. Again, you do not have to agree with the criticism to understand the mechanism. The mechanism is simple. The stronger the original narrative, the more every later action is judged against it. And in content terms, that creates endless material, because every perceived inconsistency becomes a new episode. This is why the word hypocrisy appears so often in coverage around them. Hypocrisy is one of the most clickable emotions in media. People may ignore a mistake, they may forgive a failure, they may even tolerate vanity. But perceived hypocrisy creates a very specific kind of anger. It makes the audience feel not just disappointed, but insulted. And insult is powerful. If an audience feels lied to, talked down to, manipulated, or morally lectured by someone who does not appear to follow the same rules, they do not simply lose interest. They watch more closely. They look for the next example. And that is exactly what keeps the loop alive. A new project is not received as a new project. It is received as a test. Does this prove they really wanted independence? Does this prove they still need royal association? Does this prove the critics were right? Does this prove the press is unfair? Does this prove the palace was cold? Does this prove the palace was wise? Does this prove celebrity culture cannot replace institutional duty? Every story becomes a trial, and the verdict is never final, because the next story is always coming. Now here is where the audience has more power than it sometimes realizes. The machine does not run only because public figures speak. It runs because millions of people reward certain kinds of framing. A calm, careful, balanced update might be more responsible, but it usually will not travel as fast as a headline that suggests betrayal, humiliation, collapse, or revenge. That is not because people are stupid. It is because human attention is drawn to threat, conflict, status, and moral judgment. The algorithm did not invent that, it simply learned to exploit it. And Harry and Meghan sit in a perfect conflict zone. They are close enough to power to feel important, famous enough to feel glamorous, controversial enough to feel urgent, divisive enough to guarantee comments, connected to family drama, which everyone understands, connected to monarchy, which adds history and symbolism, connected to celebrity media, which adds money and spectacle, connected to politics and culture, which adds moral stakes. That is an unusually potent mixture. So when people ask why a story about a couple in California still dominates British royal commentary, that is the reason. They are not just a couple in California. They are a content bridge between the royal family and the attention economy, and bridges get traffic from both sides. But the next question is more revealing. Who is actually making money from that traffic? The obvious answer is the press. And yes, of course, newspapers and websites benefit from this story. Harry and Meghan are reliable traffic because they give editors something most public figures cannot give them anymore: a built-in argument. A normal celebrity story often needs explanation. You have to tell people who the person is, why the event matters, what the stakes are, why anyone should care. With Harry and Meghan, the argument is already waiting. The name alone activates the audience. A headline does not have to work very hard to create tension because the tension already exists. The public has been trained for years to read almost every development as part of a larger battle. So from a media perspective, this is efficient content. You can write the story as a royal update. You can write it as celebrity gossip. You can write it as a political symbol. You can write it as a marriage story. You can write it as a PR disaster. You can write it as a comeback attempt. You can write it as proof of media cruelty. You can write it as proof of personal hypocrisy. That flexibility is valuable, and the press knows exactly which emotional buttons are sitting there. If the story involves Meghan, you can frame it around ambition, image, control, victimhood, reinvention, style, celebrity, or backlash. If the story involves Harry, you can frame it around loyalty, trauma, privilege, family betrayal, security, exile, anger, or regret. If the story involves Catherine, you can frame it around contrast, quiet duty versus public complaint, dignity versus drama, tradition versus celebrity culture. If the story involves William, you can frame it around inheritance, leadership, brotherhood, duty, and the future of the monarchy. If the story involves King Charles, you can frame it around forgiveness, weakness, distance, health, legacy, and whether a father can ever fully separate private pain from public duty. That is not one story. That is a full content library, and every outlet can choose the version that suits its audience. The tabloids can make it dramatic. The broadsheets can make it institutional. The American entertainment press can make it glamorous. The political channels can make it ideological. The royal channels can make it procedural. The gossip channels can make it personal. The same raw material gets repackaged for different markets. That is the first layer of the profit loop. But it is not the only one. Because after the press publishes, the reaction economy begins. That is where television panels, podcasts, live streams, YouTube channels, and social media accounts come in. A headline is no longer the end of a story. It is the beginning of a content chain. Someone reports it. Someone else reacts to it. Someone else reacts to the reaction. Someone clips the strongest line. Someone argues the clip was unfair. Someone finds an old clip that seems to contradict the new claim. Someone makes a timeline. Someone makes a rebuttal. Someone says the whole thing proves media bias. Someone says the backlash proves the critics were right. Someone says everyone should stop talking about it, while talking about it for another 20 minutes. And then the next day, a new headline appears about the reaction itself. That is how a single event becomes 3 days of content, sometimes more. And what makes Harry and Meghan uniquely powerful in this system is that the story has both fresh news and permanent themes. Fresh news gives people a reason to click today. Permanent themes give people a reason to care beyond today. That combination is extremely valuable for creators. If a channel covers only breaking news, it is always chasing. If a channel covers only broad analysis, it can feel detached. But Harry and Meghan allow both at the same time. You can say, here is what happened today, and then immediately connect it to a 5-year pattern. That is retention. Because the viewer is not just waiting for the fact, the viewer is waiting for the interpretation. And the interpretation is where channels build loyalty. This is why so many royal commentary videos are not really about information. They are about framing. The viewer may already know the basic headline before clicking. They click because they want someone to make sense of it in a way that matches, sharpens, or challenges what they already feel. That is an important distinction. People do not watch these videos only to discover what happened. They watch to hear what it means. And meaning is where the money is. Because meaning creates community. When a creator says, "You are not crazy, you notice the pattern too," that is powerful. When a creator says, "The mainstream media will not say this, but we will," that is powerful. When a creator says, "Look at the timing, look at the language, look at who benefits," that is powerful. It makes the viewer feel less like a spectator and more like an insider. That is why the phrase mainstream media is so important in this niche. It gives the audience a villain larger than any one article. The story is no longer simply, Harry and Meghan did this, or the palace did that. The story becomes, the media is hiding something, protecting someone, attacking someone, distracting you, manipulating sympathy, creating false narratives, or punishing the wrong people. Now the viewer is not just consuming gossip. They are participating in a correction. That feeling is addictive. And it is also monetizable. Subscriptions, memberships, paid newsletters, live stream super chats, Patreon, exclusive aftershows, sponsored segments, merchandise, donations, ad revenue, podcast downloads, newsletter growth. This is the modern commentary business. And to be clear, There is nothing automatically wrong with commentary making money. Journalism has always needed money. Entertainment has always needed money. Independent media needs revenue if it is going to exist outside corporate structures. The issue is not that money exists. The issue is what money rewards. If money rewards careful analysis, you get more careful analysis. If money rewards daily outrage, you get more daily outrage. If money rewards the most dramatic interpretation, the interpretation becomes more dramatic. If money rewards certainty, people become certain faster than the facts allow. If money rewards constant escalation, every story has to be bigger than the last one. And that is where the Harry and Meghan economy can become distorted. Because the content market does not reward maybe, it rewards this proves everything. But real life is often maybe. Maybe a decision was strategic. Maybe it was clumsy. Maybe a timing choice was deliberate. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe a source is close to the truth. Maybe a source is selling a narrative. Maybe a public silence means discipline. Maybe it means confusion. Maybe a brand launch failed because of bad positioning. Maybe it failed because the public had already made up its mind. That uncertainty is honest, but it is not always clickable. So the machine applies pressure. It pushes everyone toward sharper claims, cleaner villains, cleaner heroes, and more satisfying conclusions. And that pressure affects not only the critics, it also affects the subjects of the coverage. Because Harry and Meghan are not just being covered by the media, they are also operating inside the same attention market. This is the second layer of the profit loop. Their public story has commercial value. That does not mean every interview, every project, or every appearance is cynical. Human beings can have sincere pain and still benefit from public attention. They can feel wronged and still make media deals. They can want privacy from intrusion while still wanting controlled visibility. But that tension is exactly why the audience keeps arguing. Because the Sussex brand has often rested on two ideas that are difficult to hold together. 1. We were trapped by public scrutiny and needed freedom. 2. We will now tell our story through global media platforms. Those two ideas can coexist, but only carefully, and if the public feels the balance is off, the backlash writes itself. This is why so much criticism focuses on the word privacy. Many people heard privacy and thought it meant withdrawal. But in practice, the stronger argument from Harry and Meghan's side has often been control. Not no media, but media on their terms. Not no attention, but attention without the most hostile parts of the royal press. Not silence, but the ability to tell their own version. That distinction matters, but it also creates a problem. Because once you enter the business of telling your own story, people are allowed to review the story. They will examine the plot. They will examine the characters. They will examine the contradictions. They will examine what was left out. They will examine who was blamed. They will examine who was protected. They will examine whether the story changes depending on the platform, the audience, and the moment. And if your story involves real family members who cannot, will not, or should not respond in the same way, then the imbalance becomes part of the controversy. That is one reason the palace's silence has been so effective for some viewers. Not because silence answers every accusation, it does not, but because silence creates contrast. In an age where everyone is explaining themselves constantly, refusing to explain can look like strength. It can also look cold. It can look evasive. It can look outdated. It depends entirely on the viewer's lens. But as a media strategy, silence has one huge advantage. It does not give the machine much new material. And this is where the palace benefits, at least indirectly, from the profit loop. Not because royal scandals are good for the monarchy. They are not. Family breakdown, public accusation, and constant speculation are damaging. No serious institution wants that swirling around forever. But when the contrast is between one side speaking often and one side speaking rarely, the quieter side can begin to look more stable. The monarchy's brand is not built on emotional access. It is built on continuity. So every time the celebrity side of the story becomes noisy, messy, or contradictory, the institutional side can appear calmer by comparison. That is not always fair. That is not always the full truth. But in public image, contrast is everything. And the Sussexes have struggled with this contrast from the beginning. Because they left an institution whose power comes partly from mystery, and then entered a marketplace whose power comes from exposure. Those two worlds do not operate by the same rules. In the royal world, less can be more. In the celebrity world, more is usually more until it becomes too much. In the royal world, a photograph, a balcony appearance, a coat color, or a seating plan can carry meaning because access is limited. In the celebrity world, access is the product. The problem is that once you give too much access, you can reduce the value of mystery. And once mystery is gone, the only thing left to sell is the next revelation. That is a brutal cycle. A documentary has to reveal something. A memoir has to reveal something more. An interview has to clarify the revelation. A follow-up appearance has to respond to the reaction. A new project has to escape the old story, but also cannot fully escape it because the old story is what made the audience show up. That is the trap of narrative control. The more you explain, the more people find to question. And this is why the profit loop can be so punishing for Harry and Meghan specifically. They need attention to build independent influence, but attention reopens the royal wound. The royal wound brings clicks. The clicks bring criticism. The criticism strengthens the victimhood narrative for supporters. The victimhood narrative irritates critics. The critics create more content. The content creates more attention. The attention makes it harder to move on. Round and round. And again, this is not about whether you personally like them or dislike them. It is about incentives. Even negative coverage can keep a public figure central. Even mockery can keep a brand visible. Even outrage can make a platform more valuable. But over time, the question changes from, are people paying attention? To, what kind of attention are they paying? That distinction is everything. Because if the attention is based on respect, it compounds. If the attention is based on curiosity, it can be redirected. If the attention is based on controversy, it needs feeding. If the attention is based on distrust, it becomes corrosive. And corrosive attention is still attention, but it eats the thing it surrounds. This is why a project can be widely discussed and still fail to build durable admiration. People may watch because they are curious. They may watch because they want to criticize. They may watch because they want to see whether the reviews are as bad as people say. They may watch clips because the clips are everywhere. They may know every detail and still not trust the brand behind it. That is the difference between reach and reputation. Reach tells you how far the story traveled. Reputation tells you what condition it arrived in. A lot of modern celebrity culture confuses those two. And to be fair, the platforms encourage that confusion. Views are visible. Trending topics are visible. Headlines are visible. Follower counts are visible. Comment volume is visible. Trust is harder to measure, so it becomes tempting to treat noise as proof of relevance. But the royal family has survived for generations by understanding something celebrity culture often forgets. Not all visibility is good visibility. Some visibility creates grandeur. Some creates familiarity. Some creates affection. Some creates fatigue. Some creates contempt. And once fatigue becomes part of the brand, every new appearance has to work harder. That may be one of the biggest challenges facing Harry and Meghan as public figures. They do not simply need attention, they need a new kind of attention. Attention that is not only tied to grievance, attention that is not only tied to the palace, attention that is not only tied to what they left, attention that is not only tied to what they say was done to them, attention that is not only generated by people waiting to mock the next move. That is hard, because the market keeps rewarding the old frame. And if the old frame still pays, why would the machine stop using it? This is also where critics have their own uncomfortable role. Many critics say they want Harry and Meghan to go away. But the content economy says something different. If every appearance gets a reaction, if every product gets a takedown, if every rumor gets a live stream, if every interview gets a breakdown, if every small move becomes proof of a massive theory, then the critics are also keeping the story alive. That does not mean criticism is illegitimate. Public figures can be criticized, media claims can be challenged, contradictions can be discussed. Powerful people do not get immunity because they dislike scrutiny. But it is worth noticing the paradox. The people most exhausted by the Sussex story are often among the most engaged with it. That engagement is a form of value, and the platforms do not care whether a viewer clicked out of love or irritation. The ad system does not ask, "Was this view supportive?" The algorithm does not ask, "Was this comment approving?" The platform does not ask, "Did this share come from admiration?" Engagement is engagement. That is why outrage is such a profitable emotion. It feels like resistance to the viewer, but to the system, it often looks like demand. Every angry click says, "Show me more." Every furious comment says, "This topic activates me." Every reaction video says, "There is an audience for this." Every viral takedown tells the market, "Keep supplying the material." This is the third layer of the profit loop. The audience is not just consuming the story. The audience is training the machine. And if you are watching this because you are interested in how media narratives actually work, not just who said what today, this is the part that matters most. Because once you see the loop, you can still follow the story, but you follow it with clearer eyes. And if that kind of breakdown is useful, subscribe, because this channel is going to keep looking at the machinery behind the headlines, not just the headline itself. Now, let us go one level deeper, because the money is not only in direct revenue, it is also in leverage. For Harry and Meghan, attention can become leverage with platforms, publishers, brands, charities, event organizers, and social circles. If they can still generate global conversation, they remain commercially interesting. For media outlets, attention becomes leverage with advertisers and audiences. For commentators, attention becomes leverage with subscribers, sponsors, and influence. For the palace, restraint can become leverage because it allows the institution to appear above the noise while the noise continues somewhere else. For supporters, the controversy becomes leverage in a broader argument about racism, tabloid cruelty, mental health, misogyny, and institutional coldness. For critics, the controversy becomes leverage in a broader argument about entitlement, hypocrisy, celebrity narcissism, and attacks on tradition. Everyone gets to use the story for something bigger. That is why the story does not resolve. Resolution would actually reduce its usefulness. If everyone agreed on what happened, the market would shrink. If Harry and Meghan fully moved on, royal drama channels would lose a central engine. If the palace fully responded, mystery would reduce. If the press admitted its own incentives, the moral posture would weaken. If the audience became bored, the revenue would move elsewhere. So the most profitable version of the story is not resolution. It is permanent tension. Enough information to keep people arguing, enough ambiguity to keep people investigating, enough emotion to keep people returning, enough new developments to make the old argument feel fresh. That is the loop at its most efficient. And this is why so many stories around Harry and Meghan feel like sequels, not because the exact same thing happens every time, but because the emotional structure is familiar. A new move is presented as a comeback. The comeback is questioned. The questioning is framed as unfair. The defense creates more criticism. The criticism becomes the story. The story revives the original conflict. The original conflict sends everyone back to their starting positions. It is almost ritualistic, and rituals are powerful because people know their role. The supporters know what to say. The critics know what to say. The press knows what to write. The commentators know what to analyze. The platforms know who to recommend it to. That predictability is part of the business model, but predictability also creates fatigue. And this is the danger for every person and platform involved. A profit loop can become a boredom loop if it stops evolving. That is why each new round has to feel slightly bigger, sharper, more revealing, or more humiliating than the last. The language escalates because the audience has already heard the basic version. You cannot say tension forever. Soon it becomes crisis, then showdown, then final straw, then point of no return, then humiliation, then collapse. But if the collapse never fully arrives, the audience can become numb. That is one reason smarter content in this niche has to move beyond daily outrage and give viewers frameworks. Not just, here is today's scandal, but here is the system that makes every scandal profitable. Because once viewers understand the system, they can watch the next headline differently. They can ask, who is speaking? Who is silent? Who gets paid if I stay angry? Who gains status if this becomes a fight? Who needs this story to stay alive? Who is using moral language to sell a product? Who is using sympathy to avoid scrutiny? Who is using criticism to build a business? Who is pretending to be above the drama while benefiting from the attention? Those questions are much more useful than simply asking, who won the latest round? Because in the profit loop, winning is complicated. A headline can be bad for reputation and good for visibility. A backlash can hurt a brand and energize loyal fans. A public silence can look dignified to one audience and cruel to another. A critical video can damage its subject while enriching the critic. A failed project can still generate enough conversation to keep the next project viable. So when someone says, they are finished, be careful. Finished people do not usually generate this much content. But when someone says, they are winning because everyone is talking, be careful too. Respected people do not usually need endless controversy to stay central. The truth is more interesting. Harry and Meghan may be trapped in a form of relevance that is powerful but unstable. It keeps them visible. It keeps them discussed. It keeps them commercially useful. But it also keeps dragging their public identity back to the very institution they claimed they needed to leave. And that is why the palace's strategy matters so much. Because while the Sussex side of the story often runs on exposure, the palace side runs on endurance. And endurance is a different kind of power. That is what people often miss when they compare the palace and the Sussexes as if they are two celebrity brands fighting on equal terms. They are not. One side is trying to build a modern public platform around personality, emotion, access, and personal narrative. The other side is an institution whose entire public strength comes from making individuals appear temporary and the crown appear permanent. That does not mean the palace is always right. It does not mean the palace is always kind. It does not mean silence is automatically moral. It does not mean the institution has no flaws, no failures, and no history worth questioning. But it does mean the palace is playing a longer game. A celebrity brand needs people to keep feeling something now. An institution needs people to keep believing it will still be there later. Those are different timelines, and the profit loop favors the short timeline. It favors urgency. It favors emotional reaction. It favors daily escalation. It favors the feeling that something must be decided immediately. But monarchy does not move at the speed of YouTube commentary or tabloid headlines. It moves through ceremony, continuity, controlled access, and the slow accumulation of public impression. That is why the palace can sometimes win a news cycle by not entering it. When an accusation is made and the palace does not respond, critics may call that cold. Supporters may call it disciplined. But from a communications point of view, silence denies the other side a direct exchange. No quote to rebut, no emotional counterattack, no fresh line to put in a headline, no family member dragged into a public back and forth, no official statement that can be parsed for hidden meaning for the next 3 days. The machine wants response because response creates content. The palace often refuses to feed that specific machine. And in the Harry and Meghan story, that refusal has become part of the drama. Because the Sussexes' media power has often depended on speaking into a silence. That silence can make their claims feel more dramatic to supporters because it looks like the institution will not answer. But it can also make their claims feel less persuasive to critics because it looks like the institution is too dignified to argue. That is the strange power of silence. People project onto it. And projection is another kind of content. The palace does not have to say, "We are above this." If it simply carries on with public duties, many viewers will say it for them. A royal visit, a state event, a charity engagement, a family photograph, a balcony appearance, a quiet return to work, a carefully worded statement about something else entirely. These things may look boring compared to a dramatic interview, but boring can be very powerful when the public is tired of emotional chaos. Because not every audience wants more access, some audiences want reassurance. They want to feel that somebody, somewhere, is still behaving with restraint. That is why Catherine has become such a powerful contrast figure in this whole ecosystem. Again, this is not only about personal preference, it is about narrative function. In many videos and comment sections, Catherine is not discussed only as Catherine. She becomes a symbol of silence under pressure, duty without constant explanation, pain without public score settling, elegance without oversharing. Whether that is fully fair to her as a real person is another question. But as a public narrative, it is incredibly strong. And it becomes stronger every time the opposing narrative appears noisy, commercial, or self-focused. That is why comparisons are so profitable. Meghan versus Catherine, Harry versus William, Hollywood versus Palace, emotion versus duty, confession versus restraint, platform versus institution, visibility versus respect. Those comparisons may simplify reality, but they are extremely clickable because they turn a messy family and media story into a moral contrast, and moral contrast is easier to sell than complexity. But if we are being serious, complexity is where the real lesson is, because the profit loop does not require one side to be completely good and the other completely bad. It only requires each side to keep playing a role that the audience recognizes. Harry and Meghan play the role of the disruptors, the wounded insiders, the royal escapees, the couple trying to reclaim their narrative, the celebrities who say they are more than the institution they left. The palace plays the role of the ancient machine, the silent parent, the cold system, or the dignified guardian of continuity, depending on who is watching. The press plays the role of both watchdog and provocateur. Commentators play the role of translators, prosecutors, defenders, and entertainers. The audience plays the role of jury, and the algorithm plays the role of ticket seller. Everyone knows the stage. That is why the story can continue even when there is not much new information. A tiny update is enough because the roles are already established. If Meghan launches something, critics ask whether it is royal cosplay, celebrity reinvention, or another attempt to monetize status. If Harry speaks about family, critics ask why private pain is public content. If the palace says nothing, supporters of the Sussexes ask what it is hiding, while critics say silence proves discipline. If a tabloid reports an anonymous claim, everyone argues about whether the source is real, whether the timing is suspicious, and who wanted the story out. The new fact may be small. The old framework does the heavy lifting. This is why the profit loop is so difficult to escape. To leave it, someone has to stop playing their expected role. The press would have to stop exaggerating. Commentators would have to stop escalating. The audience would have to stop rewarding outrage. Harry and Meghan would have to build a public identity that does not depend on royal conflict. The palace would have to keep refusing the emotional bait without looking inhuman. That is a lot of people changing behavior at once. So the loop continues. And it continues because each participant can justify their part. The press can say, there is public interest. Commentators can say, we are holding powerful people accountable. Supporters can say, we are defending people who were mistreated. Critics can say, we are exposing hypocrisy. Harry and Meghan can say, we are telling our truth. The palace can say very little and let duty be the answer. Individually, each justification can sound reasonable. Collectively, they create a machine. And once a machine exists, it does not need everyone to be dishonest. It only needs everyone to keep finding their participation useful. That is the coldest part. The profit loop does not run on lies alone. It runs on usefulness. A true story can feed it, a misleading story can feed it, a rumor can feed it, a denial can feed it, a silence can feed it, a bad review can feed it, a sympathetic interview can feed it, a public appearance can feed it, even a demand to stop talking about it can feed it, if that demand becomes content. That is why viewers need a better question than, is this story true? Truth matters, obviously, but in this niche, there is another question that matters almost as much. What is this story being used for? Is it being used to inform, to punish, to defend, to sell, to distract, to rehabilitate, to provoke, to gather a community, to build leverage, to keep a brand alive? That question cuts through a lot of fog, because sometimes the same fact can be used in totally different ways. A public appearance can be evidence of resilience to one side and desperation to another. A private source can be evidence of insider concern to one side and coordinated leaking to another. A family silence can be evidence of cruelty to one side and dignity to another. A streaming project can be evidence of independence to one side and royal monetization to another. The fact is only the beginning. The use is the story. And in the Harry and Meghan economy, the use often matters more than the event itself. That is why timing becomes such an obsession. People are constantly asking, why now? Why did this story appear before that event? Why did this photo drop near that royal moment? Why did this interview happen when that family issue was already in the news? Why did this source speak today? Why did this old clip resurface this week? Sometimes timing is meaningful. Sometimes it is coincidence. Sometimes it is platform scheduling. Sometimes it is media opportunism. Sometimes it is the audience connecting dots that were never meant to connect. But the obsession with timing exists because everyone understands, at least instinctively, that attention is competitive. A royal event is attention. A celebrity launch is attention. A family anniversary is attention. A legal dispute is attention. A health update is attention. A public statement is attention. And when attention is money, timing is strategy. That does not mean every overlap is a plot. But it does mean people will read overlaps as strategy because strategy is plausible in a media economy. This is one reason trust has eroded so badly. The audience has watched too many public figures use emotion as branding, too many outlets use outrage as business, too many platforms reward conflict, and too many carefully staged moments pretend to be spontaneous. So now, even innocent actions are treated suspiciously. That is bad for everyone. It is bad for Harry and Meghan if they want future work judged on its own merits. It is bad for the palace if every silence becomes a conspiracy. It is bad for journalism if every report is assumed to be a planted attack. It is bad for viewers if every story becomes another reason to stay angry. But it is good for engagement. And that is the tension. What is bad for public trust can be excellent for traffic. That may be the single most important sentence in this entire story. What is bad for public trust can be excellent for traffic. And once you understand that, a lot of media behavior becomes less mysterious. Why do outlets run the same personalities through endless cycles of outrage? Because familiarity plus conflict performs. Why do headlines overstate? Because certainty travels faster than caution. Why do vague sources become huge stories? Because ambiguity invites speculation. Why do people with strong opinions get invited back again and again? Because heat holds attention. Why do failed projects sometimes get more coverage than successful quiet work? Because failure creates drama, and drama creates clicks. Why does the Sussex story keep coming back? Because it gives the attention economy almost everything it wants. Famous names, high stakes, family conflict, class tension, race tension, gender tension, money, power, status, media criticism, institutional secrecy, celebrity exposure, and enough ambiguity to keep everyone arguing. That is a perfect storm. But perfect storms are not stable places to live. And this is where the story becomes almost tragic, regardless of which side you are on. Because if Harry and Meghan truly wanted freedom from the royal machine, the attention economy offered them a different machine. A faster one, a louder one, a more profitable one in the short term, but also one that constantly pulls them back toward the identity of being ex-royals in conflict with royalty. That is not full freedom. That is a new dependency. If every new venture is measured against the palace, then the palace is still central. If every interview is judged by what it reveals about the family, then the family is still the product. If every brand move is interpreted as a message to Britain, the monarchy, Catherine, William, Charles, or the press, then independence is not fully landed. Because real independence would be boring in the best possible way. It would mean a project can succeed without royal comparison. A charity can be discussed without family drama. A business can be reviewed without palace symbolism. A public appearance can happen without people asking who is being upstaged. A personal statement can stand without reopening the entire archive. That is the only real exit from the profit loop. Not silence necessarily, not disappearance, not punishment, not humiliation. Just a new public identity strong enough that the old conflict is no longer the main attraction. But building that is much harder than launching another media moment. Because a new identity requires trust, and trust is slow. You cannot demand it in an interview. You cannot buy it with a production deal. You cannot force it with a press release. You cannot trend your way into it. You cannot scold the public into giving it to you. Trust is built when words and actions start matching over time. And this is where the audience becomes very unforgiving. If you say compassion, people look for compassion. If you say privacy, people look for restraint. If you say service, people look for service. If you say family matters, people look at how you treat family. If you say misinformation is dangerous, people look at whether your own claims are precise. If you say you want healing, people look for fewer fresh wounds. That standard may be harsh, but it is predictable. Public narratives create public expectations. And if expectations are violated, the loop gets fed again. So, what would actually break the loop? Not one statement, not one rebrand, not one sympathetic profile, not one glamorous event, not one successful product, not one angry denial, not one legal threat, not one palace briefing. The loop breaks only when the incentives change. For Harry and Meghan, that would mean making work that is valuable even to people who do not care about royal grievance. For the press, it would mean choosing accuracy over maximum provocation, even when provocation performs better. For commentators, it would mean admitting uncertainty when the facts are thin, even if certainty gets more views. For the audience, it would mean rewarding better analysis, not just bigger outrage. For the palace, it would mean continuing to show stability without allowing silence to become emotional neglect. None of that is impossible, but none of it is easy. Because the current system is working too well for too many people. That is why I do not think the next big Harry and Meghan controversy will be the last one. There will be another headline, another source, another public appearance, another comparison, another claim that this is the final straw, another wave of defenders, another wave of critics, another set of videos asking what it really means, and the machine will spin again. But you do not have to watch it the same way. The next time a headline appears, ask who needs you angry. Ask who needs you sympathetic. Ask who needs you suspicious. Ask who benefits if this becomes a 3-day argument. Ask whether the story gives you new information or just invites you to replay an old emotional script. Ask whether the person condemning the drama is also monetizing it. Ask whether the person asking for compassion is also using conflict. Ask whether the outlet claiming public interest is really giving you public value. Ask whether the silence you admire is actually dignity or just strategy. Ask whether the confession you admire is actually honesty or just branding. Those questions do not make the story less interesting. They make you harder to manipulate. And that is the real value of looking at Harry and Meghan through the profit loop. It does not require you to stop caring. It does not require you to pick a new side. It does not require you to pretend the controversies are meaningless. It simply asks you to notice the business model underneath the emotion. Because the emotion is real. The family rupture may be real. The pain may be real. The criticism may be valid. The media cruelty may be real. The hypocrisy may be real. The public fatigue may be real. But around all of that reality is a marketplace. And the marketplace does not care who is healed. It cares who is watching. That is the brutal truth. The algorithm does not want reconciliation. Reconciliation ends the argument. The tabloid does not want peace. Peace is a smaller headline. The commentary economy does not want final clarity. Final clarity reduces the need for interpretation. The platform does not want you satisfied. Satisfaction logs off. It wants tension. It wants unresolved emotion. It wants a question that can be reopened tomorrow. And Harry and Meghan, whether by choice, by mistake, by media hostility, or by the strange momentum of modern fame, have become one of the most profitable unresolved questions in public life. Did they escape the monarchy or build a brand around leaving it? Were they silenced or did they find the biggest microphone available? Are they victims of a cruel press or experts at using that press? Is the palace dignified or simply better at letting others damage themselves? Is the audience exposing hypocrisy or keeping the very machine alive? Those questions keep the loop moving because different people answer them differently. And as long as the answers remain divided, the content keeps coming. So the next scandal may look like a new chapter. But before reacting, look closer. Is it really a new chapter? Or is it the same business model wearing a new outfit? Because the most profitable story in the modern media world is not always the story with the clearest truth. It is the story with the most reusable conflict. And Harry and Meghan's conflict has been reused for years. By newspapers, by streamers, by commentators, by supporters, by critics, by platforms, and yes, sometimes by Harry and Meghan themselves. That is the part nobody really wants to say plainly. The drama is not just something that happens to the brand. At this point, the drama is part of the brand. And that is why the stakes are higher than the next headline. Because if controversy becomes the product, then peace starts to look like bad marketing. That is a terrible incentive for a family, a terrible incentive for journalism, a terrible incentive for public trust, and a very good incentive for the attention economy. So the real question is not whether the next Harry and Meghan story will go viral. It probably will. The real question is what kind of value it creates. Does it reveal something true? Does it clarify something important? Does it hold power accountable? Does it help the audience understand the system better? Or does it simply turn one more private wound, one more public irritation, one more symbolic gesture, one more half-sourced claim, into another round of profitable outrage? That is the line worth watching. Because attention is easy to measure, trust is not. And in the long run, the side that wins may not be the side that gets the most headlines. It may be the side that survives the headlines with the most trust intact. That is why this whole saga is bigger than royal gossip. It is a case study in modern fame. It shows what happens when personal pain becomes content, when public criticism becomes community, when silence becomes strategy, when outrage becomes revenue, and when the public starts confusing being constantly visible with being truly influential. So yes, there will be more controversies. There will be more headlines, more reactions, more claims of humiliation, more claims of vindication, more accusations that the media is unfair, more accusations that the Sussexes are exploiting their royal connection, more debates about whether the palace should respond, more arguments about who is really winning. But if you remember one thing, remember this. A media cycle does not continue for years because one person wants attention. It continues because many people profit from giving attention, taking attention, selling attention, and reacting to attention. That is the loop. And once you see it, the story changes. You stop asking only, what did Harry and Meghan do now? You start asking, why did this become profitable today? And that question gets you much closer to the truth. So when the next headline drops, and it will, do not just look at the names in the headline. Look at the machine around it. Look at who published it. Look at who amplified it. Look at who condemned it. Look at who monetized the condemnation. Look at who stayed silent. Look at who gained sympathy. Look at who gained clicks. Look at who gained leverage. Because in the Harry and Meghan story, the scandal is rarely just the scandal. The scandal is the business model. And the business model is still working.